Titles can be misleading. We're going to talk about weather, we're going to talk about tall ships, but this is not a tutorial on how to handle weather in tall ships. I'm going to show you some pictures of different types. And by the way, the whole term tall ship is subject to debate whether it's good. But if I use tall ship and you know what I mean, that's all we need to do. This, by the way, is a water spout, and that's about as close as you want to get to one. It's essentially a tornado at sea, so wind speeds can get up to 200 miles an hour, highly destructive. I've seen quite a few of them, always kind of like over there or over there, and they're moving sort of lazily, and sometimes they seem to disappear and then reform, and maybe you might see 4, 5, or 6 of them at once. But as long as they're over there, it's okay. Okay. So I spent 21 years actively at sea, and a great deal of that was in tall ships, and I'll show you some pictures of the vessels I worked on so you can picture that. And I've been teaching at Maine Maritime for 16 years now, and I'm in the deck department, so I was a captain. Well, I was a deckhand, and then I was a bosun, and a third mate, second mate, first mate captain. So I teach navigation-related things, deck, we call it deck stuff, so seamanship and radar and things like that. Okay, and we will have a Q&A period at the end. So this is my very first vessel, the Harvey Gamage, sailing out of Rockland, carrying passengers in the early 80s. That vessel is still sailing. She's a schooner. She was built new in 1973, so a replica vessel built for passenger carrying, but still is active, carrying students all up and down the East Coast. I worked on the Pride of Baltimore, the first Pride. And some of you may have heard of that vessel. I was on her in 1985. We sailed over to Europe. And this was a vessel that was built, well, even the word replica is subject to debate whether that's appropriate, but you get the idea. It was not an antique vessel. It was a vessel built new in 1977-8 to replicate a particular type of vessel known as a Baltimore clipper. And Baltimore clippers, as you can see, had an extreme rig. They were sort of prevalent around the War of 1812 because commerce raiders, privateers, they would capture commerce vessels, commercial vessels of other nations, typically Britain, ones we were at war with, very fast, run away when the Royal Navy turns up. So she had an extreme rig. The following year she was lost coming back from Europe, and I'll touch upon that a little bit later. I spent 3 years on this ship. It's a British vessel. This is a brigantine, and through the years the term brigantine has looked differently, but this is absolutely a true brigantine, built in 1911 as a cargo carrying sailing ship. Riveted iron. She's an iron ship, and that's near the end of iron because steel was already coming in and it was a superior material. But she fell upon hard times like a lot of these ships, but the hull was essentially sound, and a group of enthusiasts got their hands on the hull and blood, sweat, and tears restored her and sailed her all around the world. I was on her entirely in the Pacific, North Pacific, South Pacific, Far East, Australia, New Zealand, places like that, and she's still sailing. Tollymore, this is a 3-masted topsail schooner. There'll be a quiz on that. Was built new, 1988, as a hospital ship. So although we have this traditional rig, a sailor from 100 years ago would recognize this rig and how it works, inside it was a modern ship. And we had a pharmacy, and we had operating table, we had all the things you would need to deliver health care. We operated in Micronesia, and we would come into atolls usually, set up a clinic ashore. Most of the work we did ashore, we had generators and things like that. And stay 2, 3, 4, 5 days, depending on the population of the community, and then go on to the next place. And she's still sailing, but no longer doing that work. They got into the education, sail training side of things. So interestingly, you know now that the first Pride of Baltimore sank at sea. It was tragic, loss of life, and but rather than roll over, the city of Baltimore and the state of Maryland said, you know, that was a good thing, let's try again. Now, one of the things about the first Pride, it was not built to any particular regulations, nor was it required to be built to any particular regulations. It did not carry the public to sea, it did not sell tickets. It was an ambassador for the city of Baltimore, and we would go to different ports around Europe, North America, Caribbean, Great Lakes, representing the city and promoting the city. So she was very authentic, and maybe too authentic in some ways, and as the mission went farther and farther afield, the ship was exposed to more and more risks of the high seas, and we had that tragedy. But this vessel said, well, if we're going to do this again, and now we know what we really want, we don't want just a sort of a dockside exhibit, we want something capable of sailing all over. And so this vessel was built to Coast Guard regulations, watertight bulkheads, very different stability profile, and other kinds of safety features that you would find on any of these Maine windjammers down here, which also meet Coast Guard regulations. And this vessel was certified for ocean sailing. So I was captain of her for 5 years, sailed her to Asia, came back to the West Coast, through the Panama Canal, East Coast, or the Great Lakes a couple of times, over to Europe. So really, this vessel's gone a lot of places and it's still sailing. Great ship. Since I've come to Maine Maritime, I've had some involvement with the boat. The schooner boat belongs to Maine Maritime, and we operate her as a sail training ship for the students. My involvement hasn't been that much because I've been mostly there as an instructor, and I was not aboard when that picture was taken. But it's such a great picture, I just had to show it to you. Okay, so you've seen some pictures of vessels, tall ships that I've been involved with, and there have been some others, but those are kind of the main ones. Another area where it gives you a little more insight to not only my background, but weather and tall ships, was a project that I completed in 2003, and I wrote this book. And the book looked at these 5 cases, and you can see that none of these, we're not talking 19th century here, we're not talking 18th century, we're not talking Spanish galleys. These ships all sank with significant loss of life, and you can see since World War II. And cargo carrying was pretty much done by World War II, so these vessels were not in cargo. This was a period where we had ships lying around, people were looking at them going, well, this is such a wonderful thing, we don't want to lose this, but what do we do with these ships if they don't carry cargo? So we started to see passenger carrying coming in, educational programs, training programs, different things like that. And so that's quite different. And the people doing it were a generation removed, at least, from those who sailed cargo ships for a living, okay, where there's that long, unbroken lineage of sail ship operation. I guess you could say, inevitably, through this process of resurrection, it wouldn't always go well. And these are just sort of the major incidents that I found. And at the time I wrote this book, I had been sailing for 15 years. I was well into my career. I was captain of tall ships. And I decided, if anybody ought to know what happened to these ships, it would be me or anybody who does what I do. So I researched them. I was familiar with the Pride because I'd been on her the year before, but I didn't actually know that much about it. Just sort of, rumor stuff. Marquez I did not sail on, but I was on the eye of the wind when the investigative report came out, and she was British flagged, so was the Marquez, and the authorities tied us to the dock. We were down in Australia, they came aboard, they said, you ain't going nowhere. We just found out that one of our other tall ships sank, and we don't really know why. So you're not going anywhere until we've got it figured out. And that speaks to the state of the industry at the time. Not only was the knowledge of the operators imperfect, but the regulators themselves didn't know. What should the standard be? Okay, if you have ferries running, carrying thousands of people every day, that's where your attention is going to be, right? If you have cargo ships, people carrying oil, that's where your attention is going to be if you're a regulator. But a couple little schooners or tall ships off from the periphery, not so much. So there really wasn't a regulatory regime, there wasn't expertise for setting standards. And that led to some of these problems too. I'm going to try to go through this part pretty quickly, and I'm sorry if I say things that leave you going, but what about? I just want to make sure I get to the other things, and then if we want to come back to this, we can. 4 of these 5 cases were weather related. Okay, and I'll touch on that very briefly. This one was not. This was more of a engine failure and standards of operation situation. But yeah, 4 of the 5 were weather related. The Pamir was a hurricane. Okay, and hurricanes are always dangerous. They still are dangerous. You may have heard about the El Faro, 800-foot cargo ship, U.S. flag, supposedly meeting all the standards. Went down with all hands 3-4 years ago in a hurricane. These 3 were more isolated, not waterspouts, but what some people might call a microburst, a more localized situation where maybe the weather's kind of rough and then abruptly gets much worse and then settles out again. I just wanted to show you this. I love these. This is a Cape Horn, steel ship built in 1905. Built for going around Cape Horn. It's a one rugged ship, and they've been building them for years at this point. They knew what they were doing. But after World War II, these ships were languishing, so people had this idea, well, what can we do with them now? And so this vessel was converted to sail training, carrying cadets to sea under the German flag. She was only operated by the Germans. And they continued to carry cargo. But here's just a little tidbit to think about. In the old days, when they carried grain, they always put it in sacks. And the sacks were put down in the hold one at a time. Because you may know that as a ship moves, anything that's free to move can slide around. And grain can move kind of like water if it's free. So putting it in sacks eliminated that. So they knew that. The old-timers knew that. And they always did it that way. Come 1957, there's knowledge, there are people who know things, but it's probably not what it was. And maybe the people running this ship had done some exposure, but they hadn't 20, 30, 40 trips around Cape Horn under their belts. We went down to Argentina for grain, and a decision was made to load it in bulk, pour it into the hold, and then put a layer of sacks on top of it, actually a couple layers of sacks on top of it. Hurricane came, and there were very few. Out of 86 people, only 6 survived, and they were all cadets, no officers, nobody who could really explain what took place. But one suspicion was that the cargo shifted. They're in a hurricane anyway, that's bad, and things went from bad to worse. This was in the North Atlantic, she was lost. Albatross was American, but the Albatross and the Marquez, I'll show you, go through very quickly, but they have a commonality that you'll probably find interesting. This vessel was lost in the Gulf of Mexico in a very abrupt situation. There was a school ship, so there were students on board, several were lost. But here's just something to dwell upon. The ship was built in 1921, like this. Built for the North Sea, a pilot schooner. It's supposed to be out there all the time, week after week, all winter long in the North Sea, which you can imagine is not a really nice place. And this is in the 20s and the 30s. After the war, the vessel's sitting in Holland, someone gets it, says, wow, what a great ship. We gotta fix her up, we gotta go take her sailing. And they do that, and they get a contract for a movie. They're like, well, this isn't the right ship for the movie. But this would be great. And so they did that. They made a conversion. They converted the rig. And then other things took place, other types of conversions. A little house was added here and there that's all weight up higher. They took out a massive old engine and put a much lighter weight one down below. So changes to the vessel. And unfortunately, what they didn't do is really investigate the effect of that stability. Those stability changes. And when she was caught in a circumstance, the vessel could have sailed another 10 years, 20 years, who knows? Nothing would happen, but the right circumstances converge and over she went. The Marquez, British ship, and you might think, well, that would only happen once, right? Because once that happens, everybody's just going to know. If you convert your ship from one thing to another, then you need to really investigate the stability and research the impact of that. That's not how the world works. You know, you probably know that. Even if you work in a corporation, what's going on over there, what's going on, you know. So if we're talking two different nations, two different sovereign regulatory agencies, the Coast Guard doesn't run over to Britain and say, what's going on over here today, and vice versa. So the Marquez, 1917, looks like this. And years go by, the vessel's found languishing in the 1970s. Guy gets an idea, we can't lose this ship, we've got to do something great with it. And he's right, we don't want to lose these ships, we do want to do great things with them. I'm a great fountain of enthusiasm around this, but I've also learned a lot through this research. So the plain old schooner's not interesting enough, let's do this. And there's more for the trainees to do, more strings to pull upon. They can go aloft, that's challenging and demanding. But then the film contract comes along. And they get a contract to make a TV series of Charles Darwin's voyage around the world on the HMS Beagle. And that's not right for that role. So they do this, and they go down to Tierra del Fuego. They go on a long ocean voyage, and they come back. And of course, thinking of yourself, you know that you haven't always done everything by the book. But you also know that usually nothing goes wrong, right? I mean, do you always drive the speed limit? Probably not, but it seems to go okay. It seems to work out. And so, why wouldn't people have a similar mentality here? And remember what I said, there was really no regulatory framework. There was nothing you could walk up to as a captain or an owner say, what's the standard? Show me the list of things. It hadn't been developed. There wasn't much need for it yet. So these changes happen. We add a mast, we add squaresails, we make the mast even taller, and do all other kinds of things to make it a really exciting vessel to work on. And she sank in a tall ships race from Bermuda to Halifax. It was rough weather. There were a lot of ships out there that night because it was a race. And several of them got pummeled badly, including the U.S. Coast Guard bark Eagle had a heck of an incident, knocked over and yards touching the water. But she was a much better designed vessel and hadn't been altered. She was a really well-found vessel. This vessel had gone through all kinds of changes. Nobody really knew the measure of the cumulative impact, and she was lost with something like 17 people, and many of them were young trainees. Weather and tall ships. I mentioned about the Pride, and this vessel, unlike the others, didn't go through all these modifications. We're like, let's have more and more sails. This is what she was meant to be from the beginning. They took this off of paintings from the period. And what changed, though, was that originally she was intended to be a dockside exhibit. Okay? People can walk aboard, have an educational experience. But partway through construction, well, you can just sail around a little, right? Just Chesapeake Bay. Put an engine in her, do that, and maybe go up to Philadelphia through the C&D Canal, so it's very protected, and maybe New York. It's all, and they did that, and it seemed to work. Then the voyage out to Bermuda, that went pretty well too. With each of these expansions of the mission, the shortcomings of the vessel were revealed, so they kept trying to make the ship more suitable for a long-range voyage. But that had nothing to do with all of this up here. Okay, these were things inside the vessel, carrying more water, more fuel, habitability, stiffening the vessel for offshore waters. Those were the kinds of changes. And so up to the Great Lakes, down to the Caribbean, through the Panama Canal, up to the Puget Sound, back again, and then eventually to Europe. And as said before, she could have easily come home just fine. It could have happened. And we'd have gone back to Europe. And maybe we'd have done this for 20 years, maybe for the life of the ship. But circumstances can be that you are in the wrong place at the wrong time, and this vessel was not able to survive what was probably estimated around 70 knots, going from about 30 knots to 70 knots. That is a lot of wind. Whether that should have been the cost a ship its life like this is another matter. But I do want to clarify, because people see this picture and they go, well, of course that vessel sank. This is all they had up at the time. Okay, so one sail here and a reefed sail, diminished sail there. Okay, so that was Tall Ships Down. That was my research quite a while ago now, but it got me looking at things like microbursts and the modifications of ships, and how we seem to have gone through this process, this resurrection of traditional sail, and mistakes were made inevitably along the way, and I just thought, you know, if you can get that information out there, the whole show can go on more safely and more smoothly, which is what we want. Okay, so I'm going to leave that aside for now, and when I was preparing this, for some reason I had the impression that we were going to be in a room that had marine paintings on it, because they have an excellent marine art exhibit here. I guess you all know that if you remember it, and I would encourage you to look at that sometime. And so I was thinking, well, if I could tie into that artwork, and in the future when you're looking at these paintings in this museum or some other museum, maybe some things would be more evident to you than when you're just walking by. So anyway, how many sailors here? Yep, I figured quite a few. And for those who aren't, reefing is the process of reducing the size of a sail because the wind is getting stronger. You don't need the full sail anymore. You don't want to take it down, you want some sail, but you don't want all of it. That's what reefing is. And on a yacht, a 4.5 yacht, and it's a pretty simple affair, but you bring the sail down a little bit, and you tie off at each end, and tie in the middle, and then rehoist it, and you've got your sail back, but it's smaller. This is done aboard square riggers too, but it's a little more difficult. These are reef points up here, this row. And these are sets of reef points. You see them on the bigger sails. And what that is if my hand is the sail you're looking at edge on, there's a piece of rope hanging off the back side of the sail and a piece of rope hanging off the front side of the sail. They go right through the sail in that spot through a little run. A piece of rope might be this long, something like that, depending. And what you have to do, if we're going to reef this ship, well, for reefing, because the wind is building, these sails are been taken in anyway. Okay, we've reduced sail to that point, and we're down to our topsails, and that's what these are. So you have to bring down the sail, strike the sail, as we say, bring it down so it's loose again. You can't reef it if it's full of wind, bar tight, so you've got to make it so it's baggy. You send up a bunch of people, and you gather in the sail, and they're all along this yard here, working together, gathering in the sail. And then you get those two pieces of line, tie them together with what's called a reef knot. But if you were a Boy Scout, you might call that a square knot. But that's what it is, a reef knot. And all along here, and then you rehoist the sail. And it takes a really long time. Because remember, you're not doing this in good weather. Okay, so everything's moving. It might be raining, it might be cold. If the wind increases some more, well, you bring the sail down and you go to the second reef. And if it increases still further, you go to the third reef point. And so, it's very physical. Here are a couple of guys out on the end of the yard. The yard is this horizontal spar that you see on a square rig vessel that's holding those sails taut. That's called the yard. And this guy's got to pull the new corner out there and tie it, and this guy's digging in there to find the reef points. You got to make sure you tie the right ones to each other, because if you tie one from the second set to the first set and then you go to hoist it, you tear the sail apart. So things like that have to be done with care. So here are a couple of guys out there trying to gather in the sail. And one of the things about being a captain is that, yeah, okay, you're in charge and all that, but reefing a square sail is a lot of work. And so you want to call it right. So like, you don't want to like send everybody up there in the middle of the night, and they go through and it's dying out, and you're going, maybe we should shake out the reef. Oh, what if the wind comes back? Like a half an hour after that, and then we got to go do this again. So even though you're in command and in charge, you know, there are relationships there, and you don't want to blow your prestige or your judgment making the wrong call. So sometimes people hang on, captains will hang on before deciding to reef, or they'll hang on before shaking out the reef. It's natural. So these guys are not reefing, they're furling the sail, but it's a pretty good picture that gives you an idea of what has to go on up there. And the same thing happening out on that side. There are easier ways of doing this now, like on modern yachts, but that's how it was then. So this was the way things were done all the time, right up. And so when you look at marine art, now you know what that line of little ropes going across the sails are. Those are reef points. And in and around the 1860s, you know, nothing ever starts at once and ends at once. Things kind of gradually come in, technologies gradually go away. In around the 1860s, though, somebody had this idea. Instead of having this huge sail, we need all these people to go up and reef. What if we just made it into two smaller sails and get rid of one when we have too much sail and just keep the other one? So this is called split topsails. And what you've seen so far are full topsails. So this idea took hold, and eventually you started to see it. Full topsails didn't go away all at once, and split topsails didn't come in all at once. But this is the equivalent sail area here, a lower topsail and an upper topsail. And same here, lower and upper topsail. And that way, as the wind increases and you get down to these sails, because these are the last ones, these are the ones you want to hang on to, you know, through the whole thing if you can. Now, instead of sending 20 or 30 people up there, you just get rid of that sail. Pretty good idea. So, based on what I just told you, and probably some other things, you can tell, these ships are both sailing right now, okay, but they replicate different periods, and you can tell right now which is the older of the two, if you just by looking at the sails. There are probably some other giveaways too. The high stern, something that goes farther back and gradually went away. But this is the Lady Washington, operates out in Washington State in the Pacific Northwest, and she's got the full topsail. And you can see where the reef points are there. She's from the very early 1800s. She was an early trading vessel out there. Here's the Eye of the Wind that I worked on. She's got the lower and upper topsail, built in 1911. So they're a century apart, basically, in what they're trying to replicate. So here's something you've seen in seafood restaurants, or I don't know, a bathroom somewhere maybe. But this clipper ship, clipper ship barreling along with stunsails. Okay, so we call them stunsails in America, but this studding sails is what the Brits call them. And that's these sails out here. Okay, and these are extra sails that are put on usually light winds, or not, at least not storms, but you can see from this picture, it's not exactly a calm day out there. But I was not a clipper ship captain, and these guys would carry a lot of sail because they were being, paid handsomely to get there first. So they would carry these sails, basically downwind only. And if you're going downwind, if it's blowing 30 knots, but you're sailing at 10 knots, well, you only feel 20 knots on the deck and on the rigging, so the apparent wind is less. So we'll look at these a little closer here. So this vessel is actively sailing, okay, and she's got the stunsails. This is the Pride of Baltimore II that I worked on. And so the way it works is that you've got this boom, it's like a telescoping boom that lives up there. It's lashed on the yard. And when you decide, well, today's a good day for stunsails, you just send a couple of people up, and they unlash it, and they shove it out until it's in position. And then they lash it in that position. The sails are usually kept below, and so someone's got to drag those out and bring them up on deck. And the sail itself is tied to a kind of a stick that's lashed to all the time, or laced onto. And then the whole thing goes up from the deck and gets pulled into position. I won't go through the details of how that's all done, but stunsails are very effective. And I've used them quite a bit. And when you're out there offshore and there's not enough wind, and your working sail is just sort of like hanging there, you know, and it's slatting around, you put the stunsails up, and they're lighter material, and they tend to fill, and all of a sudden, you know, you're moving along a little bit, and the roll is dampening, and so everything just gets a little bit better. But not to be satisfied merely with stunsails, some people decide we need this other thing called a ringtail, which is a similar concept. There's this extension that gets pushed out and an extra strip of canvas added. These are light air sails, and to increase the sail area, because you've got no engine to turn on. Okay. The Pride of Baltimore II is the only vessel I know of right now that has a ringtail. A few vessels have stunsails. They're kind of rare nowadays, but some vessels have them. And you can see the other boom out here for when we get on the other tack, then you set the sail on that side. Sailors like sailing, and sometimes they just can't help themselves and they start inventing stuff. And so this is a vessel no longer with us called the Regina Maris. She just basically wore out, but a lot of sailors here on the East Coast cut their teeth on her. They would all be more like 5 or 10 years older than I am. She was starting to kind of become inactive as I got into the business, but a lot of people did sail on her. And there weren't many square riggers in the United States. You know, we got lots of schooners, but not many vessels with yards. So we got the course. What's this one?
Lower topsail.
Lower topsail. Upper topsail. Then we have the topgallant. Sometimes those have been split into upper and lower. And we have the royal. And we have the skysail. And the moonraker. Okay. And ships way back when did carry these sails. This particular crew just decided to go for it. But those sails really did exist on some extreme clippers, as they'd be called. And then it just looks like they fit in a little piece of canvas wherever they possibly could. And probably making up names all the while. Every time, okay. So this is a light air situation, as we can see. So in the days of sail, we have certain standard rigs. A schooner means one thing usually. A brigantine means something else. A barkentine. A ship is not just any old vessel. In terms of the rig it is carrying, it's very specific. 3 masts or more, square sails on all 3. But all the time, it was common for people to hybrid various rigs. A certain captain like this or like that, or maybe the materials were not available, and materials were available, so they'd make modifications. And they would take maybe some of the best things from a square rigger and try to blend it with a fore and aft rig, that type of thing. So I'm just going to show you 2 other things that you don't see very often, but they did exist. The Reefing, which is, well, it's not a square sail, is it? It's a triangular sail. This is a schooner, the Dennis Sullivan, but it just has 1 yard. But with 1 yard, you can do all this, and it's a lot less gear, it's more manageable, and you get to add this extra sail. This would be a light air type of sail. Not very good going to windward, but off the wind, you put that up there, and it would help you along a little bit. The Tollymore, this was the hospital ship, we had one too, it's the little guy up there. So this would be a situation where 10 knots, 15 knots, maybe 20 knots if you're going downwind. You put those, we call them kites. So a kite is a generic term for anything that's kind of an extra sail. Stunsails are kites, ringtails are kites. Some people might consider this a kite, it's extra sail out of the extreme ends of the rig. And as weather increases, you move back toward the center of the rig. You get rid of the kites first, and then get closer to where the rig is stronger, and the center of effort is closer to the center of the ship. So, you know the term getting caught aback, right? Like, what's getting caught aback mean in just sort of ordinary daily conversation?
Stopped.
Yeah, kind of stopped in your tracks, or surprised, or like something unexpected. Yeah, getting caught aback. Yeah. So this is a schooner, fore and aft rig, no square sails. This is the American Eagle, I believe, coming past, what is this place? Rockland Lake. Okay, so a fore and aft schooner really can't get caught aback. So caught aback means you're getting the wind on the wrong side of the sails, which means you're going to stop. But a schooner can't really get caught aback. You can get the wind on the wrong side of the sails, and there's a lot of luffing and flapping and noise, and somebody starts to yell, but it's hard to do damage getting caught back in a fore and aft rig. You get it sorted out. With a square rigger, you can do serious damage if you get caught aback. In fact, you can dismast the entire ship. Because the way a square rigger is rigged is it's very strong side to side, lots of shrouds, wires, or cables going down to support it against side to side forces. And it's strong from astern, wind coming from astern, the ship is moving with the wind. But it's not so strong from dead ahead, because you can only run so much stuff out there and still have sails out there. And the whole idea of this bowsprit, that's obviously a rather fragile part of things. So a sailor in strong weather, you want a really good helmsperson, because you need to keep the vessel going to windward as much as possible. You don't want to give away ground, but if you get too close to the wind gets on the wrong side of the sail, in this condition, they get caught aback, it can come down just like dominoes. Something parts out here, breaks, or this snaps off, first mast, second mast, third mast, and it's all over. So steering square rigger, especially in strong weather, was something that people needed to be good at. You couldn't just get caught aback every once in a while in a gale. That was unacceptable. This guy is going downwind. He's got the wind behind him, so his sails are more squared off to the hull, so he doesn't have to worry about getting caught aback. But this guy's trying to go toward the wind, and he's in some possible jeopardy. So getting caught aback and getting dismasted can look like this. And this is Frederick Chopin, a Polish sail training vessel. This is somewhere south of Britain, and you can see she's been taken in tow. This is only a few years ago. The vessel that I was captain of, Pride of Baltimore II, 2 years after I left, was in the Bay of Biscay, going from France down to Spain. They didn't get caught aback exactly, but they were in fairly strong weather with a lot of sail up, and a piece of hardware failed. The key piece of hardware failed up in the bow, up forward there. And of course, if one thing fails, then you have redundancy in the rig, but it means everything else is working harder than it was intended to. So then maybe another thing fails, and now what you have left is working even harder than it was intended to, and you can kind of picture how it goes from there. Nobody was hurt in either of these cases, and people were on deck because it was a change of the watch, so there were a lot of people on deck, but nobody was hurt. It just missed everybody. Great. It was 2005, 2 years after I had come to Maine Maritime. That's a 20-inch diameter piece of Douglas fir, just snapped off. We're looking forward at the windlass for bringing the anchor up, and so on, just an anchor on the rail. So, lesson for tonight. Don't get caught up. All right, I think I can leave you with a sea story, but it also ties into weather. And it goes a little like this. So in 2000, we sailed the Pride of Baltimore II over to Europe because the Millennial Tall Ships event was a big deal here in North America. It was a big deal over there in Europe. Ships, international fleet, you know, ships from all kinds of countries. And it was time for us to come home. It was October, and we were down here in a place called Baltimore, Ireland. So without going into too much detail, the Pride of Baltimore, the first Pride, and then the second Pride, we had a very nice relationship with the village of Baltimore, Ireland, which is a village of a few hundred people. But that's an ongoing relationship. So it was time for us to come home, October, and I was just taking command. I was relieving the other captain. He was going home, and I had to bring the ship home. So you can imagine if you have a big, powerful engine and you want to go from one place to another, you point the ship at that spot and you just go there. You don't have to really think about the wind. Not entirely, you know, hurricanes and ocean currents you do need to take into consideration, but you can operate in a much more direct way than a sailing ship, because a sailing ship needs wind. And so for a sailing ship, the shortest voyage is frequently not the shortest distance between 2 points. And you've heard of the trade winds. Okay, they call them the trade winds, and they're in both the Atlantic and the Pacific, both north of the equator and south of the equator. But here in the North Atlantic, we have the trade winds are kind of northeast, and they blow in this area. Columbus knew about them, the Portuguese knew about them. There's an old phrase, if you're going to the New World, go south until the butter melts, and then turn west to the Caribbean. And they could sail those trade winds across and then go where they needed to from there, using the prevailing winds. But it's not the shortest distance, but it's the best sailing. So vessels heading to the Caribbean from Northern Europe typically want to get as far west as possible, because although we have nice northeast trade winds blowing down here, we have powerful westerlies blowing into Europe up here. This is the Bay of Biscay, and this is a place that many stories of sailors being caught, they call it embayed. And the strong westerly winds of the square-rigged ship can't go to windward very well. They get trapped in there, and they get pushed up to the shore and shipwrecked, or at least get into dire situations. So then and now, you know, even now with yachts that are migrating to the Caribbean, the idea is to get as far west as possible in Europe before you head south. So Falmouth, England is a popular jumping off spot right there at Land's End. But even better would be the west of Ireland. And you can come down. So our mission was to get down to Lisbon and then go to Madeira, pick up the trade winds and go home. But then what we were doing is what's been done for centuries, nothing special. So we're in Baltimore Harbor, and I don't have a way to really convey scale, but maybe I'll get there. The white is all good. We draw 13 feet. The white's all good, and a little bit of the blue is good. Got some rocks over here. This distance is less than a mile across, let's say. And this is the open ocean, the Atlantic Ocean. And yeah, again, we're here. So there's really nothing between us and North America. When a storm comes, this is one of the first places it hits. And October is known for storms. And there had been a couple in the days prior to me coming aboard. But the vessel had been anchored right around here and had ridden out both of them okay. So when you go aboard your ship and you're taking command, and there are a bunch of things you have to do. You got to talk with the off-going captain, you got to talk to the mate, you got to find out how much fuel's aboard, go talk to the cook, how are we doing for provisions, everything good there. And then the other thing, if you've been overseas, is you have to reconcile the petty cash. All right, and the ship, and I'm working from memory here, this must have been before the euro, or at least before the euro was widespread, because I had like 6 or 7 currencies that I had, and they're all like laid out on the bed, and I got to count them up and try to make sure that, because at that point on, if the numbers don't agree, it's my fault, right? So that's just one of the things you do. So I was down there, I knew we had a storm coming, or something coming, it was forecast, But we'd ridden out 2 already, and anchors were dug in well, both were out. But it was morning, and I'm going through all these different exercises, and checking on deck, and we had an anchor watch. So we're watching things pretty closely, and the wind, sure enough, starts to build, and starts to build, and gets stronger, 20, 30. And I don't know, at some point, though, the anchors just started to drag, and that was obvious. So we have to get the anchors up, and forget about the money, and tried to go over here and anchor. A little more protection, because it was kind of coming in. The anchors wouldn't hold, because we're up to 40, 45 knots, and there's a swell rolling in, too. So it's not just the pressure of the wind. We've got a swell that's making its way in. So we were unable to anchor. And we couldn't go up in there because it's not deep enough, and to go out was sort of, seemed like madness, at least at the time. Maybe this thing will blow through before dark. At least it was happening in daylight. So we spent the next 9 hours just trying to hold position with engine, at least we had that, in this area. At one point we lost one of the engines. That was great. But the engineer got down there and got it going again pretty quickly. Somewhere in the early part of this morning, so there's a Royal Lifeboat that's stationed here, and they decided, well, this is what we need to go training in, right? We want to train to rescue people in flat water, we got to go out when it's rough, so. And that's a volunteer organization, by the way. So these guys go whizzing by, they're heading out into there. It's probably around 30 knots at this point, and these boats are designed for that sort of work. This gives you an idea of what's kind of all around me, though. It's, you know, not a nice sandy. This thing's about 40 feet tall. So we're looking at, you know, maybe 90 foot of cliff there. And then the North Atlantic. So they go out to do their exercise, but there was a yacht out there in some difficulty, so a helicopter was scrambled to go check on them. And they go out and snap this picture. We're like in here somewhere. And you can see why going out was, you know, kind of a last resort. But, you know, maybe better than staying in if you can't control the situation. But there's an old expression, so yeah, these are probably rolling in around 30, 40 feet, and that spread is, you know, 120, 30 feet. But there's an old expression, no matter how bad it gets, it can always get worse. So that was probably my worst experience at sea. And we weren't even at sea, but we couldn't get to sea, and it was worse.
It's worse than being at sea.
Yeah. So I took a picture of the barograph, and I think this was the earlier gale, maybe a day or so earlier. And 980 to 8 is not, it's by no means severely low. I mean, the barometer can go a lot lower than that. But in terms of what you experience, it's not only how low it goes, but how quickly it goes down there and quickly bounces back. So you can see a pretty severe drop-off. And then, fortunately, you know, around 4 in the afternoon, starting to get pretty dim, things dropped down to 35, 30, 25, and we were able to anchor. And then, look at that, boom, just jumped right up. So, that's my sea story and wind story. And all's well in the end.